few blonde tresses had loosened from her chignon and now framed her face. She wondered how she would look bald.
So you have a knack for taking the scandals of the past, since both your books are set over 18 years ago, and using them as plots, just as similar scandals are about to take place currently. Now, Foliage, with its banking irregularities since the financial meltdown, and Pinot Noir having elements of the Jeffrey Epstein case. Is this just a matter of cycles, or do you instinctively feel plugged in to the zeitgeist of our times?
That's so interesting because it's been this ongoing thing where I've always felt like I knew what was going to happen. And I thought maybe it was just my imagination. And then I wrote Foliage. And then I was really afraid when I was going to release Foliage about, like, I don't know, legal or scandal or, because it's based on true stuff. And I was kind of nervous about the release. And then literally 2 months later, the Panama Papers came out and everybody was like, oh my God, Lorraine, maybe I am tagged into the group think or something, but I don't know. I do think I have an instinct. And then who knew on Pinot Noir, who knew? Honestly, I did not expect to be following this scandal that I dug up over, my research. Right. And then all of a sudden the same stories are coming out when I released it. It's just coincidence or weird, or I do feel that I'm always trying to make connections. So that has always been my lifelong. I've always tried to make connections, or I always felt that everything was connected. I definitely always felt everything was connected. So I like the little clues of Louise Moscow, finding, making these connections. So it makes sense. That's why she's me, I guess, or, part of me.
Well, let's talk a little about that. Your main character, Louise Moscow, is a combination of experiences in your past in the film and finance business, combined with the spy stuff that you added. How did you come up with her last name, and what type of person did you want to make sure she was to your audience?
Number one, what I wanted to make sure she was authentic, genuine. I just think a Midwestern thing, it's the way, I always say Chicagoans have a bullshit meter. It has to be, we can tell if somebody's superficial or whatever the word is. Nothing against that. It's just, we're just that way. So that was number one. So that's why I never write anything unless it's like something I genuinely experienced in one way or another, and or researched. And so, but her name is based on the real life person. I believe his name is actually John Moscow, and I so sneakily changed it to George Moscow. But he's actually an attorney who's still in the world doing these kind of investigations, and but it's kind of loosely based on him, really. And but he is the guy who actually uncovered that BCCI scandal. So that Moscow, and then Louise is based on my sister who is in heaven, my baby sister, who her name is actually Karen Louise, and she was way ahead of our time. She hated the name Karen for some reason when she was in her teens, and she started insisting going by her middle name Louise. And so in honor of her, I named Louise that. And then you see in Pinot Noir, I use Karen for her.
Yep.
Her new name, her fake name or whatever.
Right.
So it's all connected to something.
So Foliage was your first novel, and now you're a veteran writer with your second novel coming out. Since the writing of the first one is long in your past, what advice in retrospect would you give somebody to write their first novel?
Just write. That's what the cliche, just write. I personally wrote, they say write what you know. I did that. I remembered this scandal in Foliage when I lived in Paris. It happened while I was there, and my friends were involved in that. Not involved like criminally, but working at BCCI at the time. And so I always remembered that. And then I just decided I wanted to write a novel. Actually, it's my husband's fault. I had written a couple screenplays, and he's like, your writing is more geared toward novel, just write novels. So that's when I decided to do that. So I would say just write, because you don't know, maybe, you get, there were maybe one time I started to write a novel, and I just gave up really fast because there was no real depth to it or something, the subject, whatever the subject was. But when I got this subject and started researching it more than what I had just experienced in my actual experience, there was just so much to it. So if you have a subject that you really believe is fascinating and has a lot of depth that you can take through a whole novel, then you should just go with that. And but sometimes it takes a couple starts and stops, because if it doesn't have the energy to keep going, then it's, there's not much you can do about that. But, and then as my husband says, I never have writer's block. I think it's because I do make these connections and I always find stuff that fascinates me. But, I think I did have to get through an initial problem with where is this going to go? It didn't have enough, the subject matter didn't have quite enough meat or something. So if you really feel like you have it in you, just write, really.
All right.
This is Patrick McDonald for HollywoodChicago.com. Copyright 2020.